Mackenzie Walter.
Brian Trump, newscaster.
Nicholas Rosales, newscaster.
Hello, I'm Nicholas Rosales, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the key people in the American Constitution. The person who wrote the American Constitution was James Madison. Another main person in the American Constitution was Alexander Hamilton, who was a Federalist, and he was one of the founding fathers of the nation. Another key person in the American Constitution was an attorney who was an anti-Federalist named Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry was a governor of Virginia, and he's well known for "Give me liberty or give me death." There are many other key people in the Constitution, but these were the people who I believe contributed the most. Now to Brian with the Enlightenment.
Enlightenment was an intellectual and philosophical movement which dominated the world of ideas in 18th century Europe. The Enlightenment created around ideas based on reason and was the root of liberty, progress, tolerance, fraternity, constitutional government, and separation of state and church. It also happens to be the primary source of authority and legitimacy. The Enlightenment is embedded in the Constitution solely because of the social contract by John Locke that justified American independence from England. The ideas of religious tolerance, freedom of speech can be found in our First Amendments. Separation of powers and having a constitutional government is also a part of the foundation of our government. The Constitution is the supreme law of the United States of America. It consists of 7 articles which delineates the national frame of our government. The first 3 articles are the separation of powers. The legislative branch, which consists of the bicameral Congress, the executive branch, which consists of the presidency, and the judicial branch, which consists of the Supreme Courts. Articles 4, 5, and 6 consist of concepts of federalism. These describe the rights and responsibilities of state government and of the states in relation to the federal government. Article 7 is the procedure used to ratify the Constitution. The Constitution was created on September 17, 1787, ratified June 21, 1788, and effective on March 4, 1789.
Thank you, Brian, for talking about the Enlightenment. But what about the Articles of Confederation?
The Articles of Confederation was the prototype constitution of the first 13 original states of the United States of America. It began or was created on July 2, 1776, and ratified by the 13 states on March 1, 1781. A guiding principle was to preserve the independence and sovereignty of the states. This article was forced during wartime, specifically during the American Revolutionary War. It was used to conduct business, conduct diplomacy with foreign nations, and deal with territory and Native American relations. Like any prototype, there was an abundance of weaknesses. The Articles of Confederation didn't enable Congress to tax or to regulate foreign and interstate commerce. Each state only had 1 vote in Congress despite size. Okay, we can start. Each state only had 1 vote in Congress despite size, which was ineffective in democracy. This, along with giving states its own sovereignty and jurisdiction, allowed for strong states but a weak central government, especially if it can't tax or regulate commerce. On top of that, there wasn't an executive branch to enforce acts passed by Congress, no judicial branch, and states could levy tariffs on other states' goods. A weak central government with many independently strong states doesn't seem united at all. In the end, the 13 articles of the Articles of Confederation consist of the first article establishing the name of the United States of America, the second, each state sovereign and free, the third article meant that they were bound in league of friendship, the fourth article was citizenship, the fifth, Congress, sixth, power of foreign treaties in Congress, seventh, to form a standing army, eighth, payment of war, 9, outlined the Congress duties, 10, in recess 9 states made a decision, 11, allow Canada or other states to join the United States of America in the future, 12, Congress makes financial agreements, and 13th article summarized document which made it perpetual.
I'm here to talk about Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion was an armed uprising in Massachusetts during 1786 and 1787, led by the brave Daniel Shays. Daniel led 4,000. Okay, now over to Vanessa with Constitutional Convention.
The Constitutional Convention took place between May and September of 1787. It addressed the problems of the weak central government that existed under the Articles of Confederation. What emerged of the convention was the United States Constitution. This established a federal government with specific powers and a reinforced federal system. Federal authority was divided between the legislative, judicial, and executive branches. After the necessary number of state ratifications, the Constitution became the basis of the United States government. The most important compromises that was established during the convention was the Three-Fifths Compromise. The compromise was proposed by James Wilson and Roger Sherman, who were both delegates. The compromise stated that all slaves of a particular state are to be counted as 3/5 of a white person when appointing representatives as well as presidential electors. Many opposed to slavery only wanted to consider free people of the population, while those in favor of slavery agreed with Wilson and Sherman's idea. Their idea enabled slaveholders to have more seats in the House of Representatives. This power allowed for the South to have more political power, in turn giving them control of the presidential election. Many did not agree with their ideas, and we'll see how long it lasts. The Great Compromise was an agreement that large or small states reached during the convention. It defined the legislative structure and representation that each state would have under the U.S. Constitution. It was proposed by Roger Sherman and allowed for each state to have 2 representatives in the upper house. For every 300,000 citizens, a state received 1 member to serve in the House of Representatives and 2 senators. The agreement focused on working out the interests of large states like Virginia and New York and small states like New Hampshire and Rhode Island. It gave equal representation to the upper house and lower house, striking a balance between proportional and general representation. This compromise led to the creation of the 2-chambered Congress and the House of Representatives. The Bill of Rights was proposed by James Madison as a response to calls from several states that wanted greater constitutional protection for individual rights. Federalists believed that the Constitution did not need a Bill of Rights because the people in the states kept any power not given to the federal government. Anti-Federalists believed that the Bill of Rights was necessary to safeguard individuals' liberty. One of these laws is the First Amendment. The founders saw the natural right as individuals to speak and worship freely.
Thank you, Vanessa. Now back over to Brian with Federalist versus Anti-Federalist.
Versus Anti-Federalists. Anti-Federalists were those that opposed the development of a strong federal government and the ratification of the Constitution in 1788. They rather preferred the power to stay in the hands of state and local governments. However, Federalists wanted a strong federal government and ratification of the Constitution to properly manage tensions following the American Revolution. In other words, Anti-Federalists were pro for the Articles of Confederation, and Federalists were pro for the Constitution. The Federalist Party was formed by Alexander Hamilton from 1792 to 1824, which was the first political party in. To compare the Anti-Federalists and Federalists, we have to look at many aspects such as position of Constitution. The Anti-Federalists opposed the Constitution until the inclusion of the Bill of Rights. The Federalists proposed and supported it. Prominent figures of Anti-Federalists are Thomas Jefferson, James Moore, Patrick Henry, and Samuel Adams. Prominent figures of the Federalists were Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, John Jagg, and John Adams. Based on the economy, Anti-Federalists wanted domination by farmers and smaller rural communities with local power. The Federalists wanted domination by big business interests, wanted government to help regulate economy. Another aspect is position on fiscal and monetary policy. Anti-Federalists felt states were free states that should manage their own revenue and spend their money as they saw fit. Federalists believed or felt that many individual and different fiscal and monetary policies led to economic struggles and national weakness. They favored central banking and central financial policies.
Okay, now over to Vanessa with the live interview.
Go.
Here we have Rachel Cunnings to tell us a little bit more about the Northwest Ordinance.
The Northwest Ordinance was created in 1787 and was an act of Congress that provided for the government of the new Northwest Territory, and it set forth a new policy of the addition of new states in the nation. When a population reached 5,000 residents, they could elect their own assembly, although the governor would retain absolute veto power. When 60,000 people were in population, the residents could draft their own constitution and petition for full statehood. The Northwest Ordinance provided for civil liberties and public education within new territories. However, it did not allow slavery. This was not a problem, though, as pro-slavery Southerners were willing to go along with the ordinance because they had high hopes that new states would be populated with white settlers from the South. However, members of the Congress knew that if the new Confederation were to survive intact, they had to resolve the new states' competing claims to this Western territory.
Now over to Vanessa with the Alien and Sedition Act.
The Alien and Sedition Act was a response to the foreign threat that anticipated war. It was passed by the Federalist Congress in 1798 and was signed by President Adams. No immigrants were allowed in, and it made it difficult for them to vote. The Sedition Act prohibited public opposition to the government and caused people to be punished with fines or imprisonment. Over 20 newspaper editors were arrested and some were imprisoned. Under this act, an individual's protection under the First Amendment was violated.
Thank you, Vanessa. Now over to a live interview about the Hartford Convention.
Now we have Kendon to inform us a little bit more on the Hartford Convention.
The Hartford Convention was a secret meeting in Hartford, Connecticut of the Federalist delegates from Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont. They were dissatisfied with President Madison's mercantile policies and the progress of the War of 1812, also known as Mr. Madison's War, as well as the long resentfulness over the balance of political power that gave the South effective control of the national government.
Now to a live interview of Barbara Keyes about the Marshall Court.
This is
Barbara Keyes.
And what are some of the key cases on?
The Marshall Court?
Yes.
The Marshall Court refers to the Supreme Court of the U.S. from 1801 to 1835 when John Marshall served as the fourth Chief Justice of the U.S. He played a major role in increasing the power of the judicial branch as well as the power of the national government. Some key cases are the Marbury versus Madison, which is the first act of the judicial review. Fletcher versus Peck, it showed federal supremacy. The Cohens versus Virginia, it said that when states ratified the Constitution, they must submit to federal authority. The Gibbons versus Ogden, it showed that the federal government's power to override decisions in the state courts. And the last case, Rochester versus Georgia. This case showed that the court ruled that only federal government had authority to regulate access to Indian country.
Now over to Vanessa with the Whiskey Rebellion.
The Whiskey Rebellion was a tax protest against the newly placed tax on whiskey. This has been the first imposed tax on domestic products by the federal government, and taxpayers are not happy. They imposed this tax in an effort to lower the federal deficit, but all it has done is upset the taxpayers. Farmers are enraged and have burned the Inspector of Revenue's house. Over 6,000 gathered to protest, and the law was finally restored in 1794.
Thank you for watching your local news, and you stay classy, Cypress High School.